Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an investment firm with over 20 years' experience, now expanding its offering to a wider pool of investors.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, ELTIF, that provides access to real estate investment through a regulated and professionally managed fund. Open is designed for long-term stability, and unlike many investment vehicles typically restricted to professional investors, they are available to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investment requirements, making them more accessible than ever. To learn more, visit greenmanopen.com.
Before making any investments, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Hello and welcome to this, our latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
So we've loads to get through on today's programme. We're going to be talking about arguments over speaking rights in the Dáil. That row continues to rumble on. The triple lock, which is something that the government is looking to remove when it comes to sending our peacekeeping forces abroad. We'll be looking at the politics involved in all of that. The now infamous X-ray machine in the National Gallery. We're also going to be talking about the National Children's Hospital at the other end or the other extreme of public waste, and also some news from Ivan on the green agenda and changes that he believes are coming in relation to that. But I want to start, Ivan, with the big invite. It arrived for Taoiseach Micheál Martin. The 12th of March is the day when he is going to go to the White House to meet with President Donald Trump. Is this something that should be regarded as good news, in that it would have been bad news had we been snubbed? But is it limited good news in that going to meet with Donald Trump could be a very difficult tightrope act to actually perform?
Well, first of all, I think that we're utterly obsessed by looking at this from an Irish context, insofar as that in terms of American opinion, American influence, we're a fly on the tail of an elephant here. And so therefore, I think the big story this week is what a week it's been for Trump. He looks like having 4 significant victories in one go. Just let me roll this out for you. One, the prospect of getting peace in Ukraine. There was actually no talks, no basis for peace. All that might do for the energy sector, for world peace, for so on. So that's the first thing that is moving ahead. The second thing is this deal he's done with the Ukrainians for the magnesium, the lithium, the titanium, and all the other IMs. Is really quite incredible. Insofar as that it looks like he'll have 500 billion worth of resources out of 10 trillion, it should be said. Ukraine is mineral rich. So for the first time, America is going to get paid something for the security it's provided to Ukraine. But also, it now looks as the cue to kiss his ass, not his ring, the kiss his ass from Macron to Starmer and now to Micheál Martin. The fact of the matter is, he is going to get his way on Europe providing any peacekeeping force in Ukraine if there is a peace settlement, and Europe paying its way for European defence through their subscriptions to NATO. So I'm looking at a situation that all the ducks are moving his way.
What are you on at the moment?
I don't know. I'm just you see, people are blind to the reality. How is this likely to end up if he does a deal with Putin, if he does a deal with Ukraine, and if he redoes the financing of the security of Europe? It's a win-win-win for the Americans.
Sorry, have you ignored all of what's going on in relation to threatening the European Union with tariffs, undermining the relationship with Europe? He threatens tariffs against the European Union at a time when behind the scenes he's looking to remove sanctions on Russia. He's looking to reward Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. You talk about a peace deal. What you're talking about is essentially looking for Ukraine to surrender, right? There's no guarantee of that. Ukraine has set out very much its red lines in relation to what any deal would actually involve. It would involve Russia surrendering the land that it has stolen from Ukraine, returning to pre-war borders, and it would also involve Ukraine joining NATO. So I don't see where you think that a peace deal is imminent or is actually very likely. Some sort of deal may be cobbled together, but it is as far away, and it is not going to be on the terms that Donald Trump sets down on behalf of Putin. And the European Union countries are actually been quite strong in relation to that. In this idea of queuing to kiss his ass, no, I think actually what actually happened, I think, was quite instructive this week. Emmanuel Macron went over on behalf of France and on behalf of the European Union and put it up to Trump in his own Oval Office. And this is one thing about Trump. There's two different Trumps. There's a Trump who does the buffoonery, blustering, performative stuff on stage and at his press conferences and throws stuff out absolutely wildly. And then there's the Trump who, when he's in the room with serious adults like Macron and like Keir Starmer, starts backing off on things. Now, the problem is he starts making promises to them in public, he starts backing off his positions, and then he goes back and he starts again with the buffoonery. But it was very interesting to see how he gets a little bit, I wouldn't say chastened, but certainly when he's in the presence of other world leaders who actually have a greater intellectual depth, he starts stepping back from his positions, which then leaves Micheál Martin in an interesting position in what he's going to have to do when he actually gets in there. And to saying this, we are recording this in advance of Zelensky going in. I mean, did you even notice how Trump, the bullshit that you get out of Trump, 1 minute, Zelensky is a dictator, which is an offensive thing to call a democratically elected man who's defending his country from an invasion by a dictator, which is a phrase that Trump won't use about Putin, which tells you an awful lot about Trump. So we don't know how Zelensky gets on, and we don't know what the conditions are going to be on this deal in which America buys these rare minerals from Ukraine. But Micheál Martin is going to have a difficult job between treading the line between being pragmatic and flattering the big bully that Trump is without actually looking like a toady. It's going to be difficult for him to do that. It's going to be a test of his diplomatic skills.
Well, I'd say that'll be no bother to him whatsoever. I mean, first of all, park the tariff issue as a separate row of particular concern to Ireland and all of that. I'm just talking about what's happened this week in relation to Ukraine. And I'm looking at where will we be on September 1? Look, the reality is Macron is almost a busted flush. He's on the way out the door. He's at the end of his term of presidency. He can't appoint a government in France. It's totally unstable, right? The Germans are in a state of change of government, and they're going to find it quite difficult after the election to put a government together. But Merz, I think, is a much better prospect than Scholz. So, but if you look at where this might end up, I totally accept that Trump is a bluffer, is a kind of shoot the mouth off first and talk and negotiate later. But if you look at what Rubio is doing, and if you look at where the prospect of peace is, I mean, the Ukrainians cannot win this war. Like, let's start that with an opening position.
Why not?
Europe,
why not?
Because they don't have the resources.
But if they had been given more resources, they could have had a much better chance. If the sanctions that Europe and America imposed had actually gone deeper rather than been half-arsed, then there was every potential that Ukraine could have won this war. It would have meant more pain in Europe initially in relation to higher energy prices if we turned off the tap from Russia rather than actually saying we would only pay up to a certain price, rather than just saying we won't take their gas and oil at all. Yes, it would have actually meant suffering in Europe economically for a couple of years, but it could have meant Russia would have been beaten, and it could have meant that Ukraine could have won the war. So this idea that Ukraine couldn't win the war or can't win the war actually isn't entirely accurate.
Well, put it like that, we'll agree to disagree on that. I mean, I think there's no question that Ukraine, I mean, even on the modest issue, post a ceasefire for Europe providing peacekeepers, a very tepid response from Europe. Europe's ability and desire to double down to support Ukraine in a military sense is coming to an end. Look, this has gone on for 3 years, and I think it's time we faced reality that it's in everyone's interest to have a peace deal, to have a ceasefire, and of course it does mean that Ukraine are going to cede things, but they're not going to cede their state, and I can see a lot in it for Ukraine in terms of if they get the security guarantees and so on, which is a big sticking point in terms of Trump is not prepared to do that. But what I'm looking at is the prospect of an end to the conflict, even though you would say it wouldn't be a satisfactory outcome, is an end to the migration of 4 people exiting Ukraine and the pressures that's put on the rest of Europe.
Sorry, 4 million people.
4 million people. Then we move along to a situation whereby he has put the mirror up to Europe and said, look, it is not the United States' job to defend Europe. It's your job to defend Europe. And as you know, Starmer increasing his defence spending to a modest 2.5% by 2027. An extra $6 billion is all a step. But every government in Europe is now having to face the fact that they have been freeloading on America. And it's going to taper off. And, you know, if you look
I'm not disagreeing with you that. I mean, I did say that last week, that, I mean, I think that the European Union was badly at fault in not preparing for Trump coming back in and taking this position on defence, given that it was quite clear he believed that during his first term in office. So Europe has been very slow. But however, I think there is a realisation now, and there's a commitment developing towards countries spending an awful lot more on defence. And this we get
their own defence rather than Ukraine's defence.
Yeah, but I think
they're not even prepared to say, you're the only one who put their hand up and say, we will definitely send planes, peacekeepers with Starmer. No one came out of Paris in the Macron meeting and said, yeah, write us down for that.
You can be damn sure, though, what many of the Eastern European countries are thinking privately. They will defend Ukraine because it's in their own interest to defend Ukraine as well. And that's why countries like Sweden and Finland have joined NATO, because and if they feel that NATO can no longer be relied upon, there are going to be major issues at the European Union, which Ireland is going to be involved in. But we'll come to that again in a minute.
My summation of this is, by September 1, from the position that Trump took over on January 1, there will be a potential reset of European security. There's a potential of peace and all that will flow from that. And America have got a few quid out of Ukraine in terms of minerals. If I was in Texas, I would say, go on, you good thing.
Let me come back to Micheál Martin going to the White House, because there's a couple of things there. You know the way everyone went on about how Joe Biden had become doddery and confused and wasn't up to it? Well, what do you make of some of the revelations from what happened with Donald Trump being with Keir Starmer? I don't know if you noticed this. I mean, there was I can only imagine what Morgan
He loved the letter from King Charles.
He did. But
he was drooling over that one.
But he was trying to. I wonder what Morgan McSweeney, you know Morgan McSweeney from Cork, who is, many people say, not just Keir Starmer's key aide, but the man who essentially controls Keir Starmer, that he's the Prime Minister in almost everything but name. He is so deeply influential. He was sitting on the sofa in the Oval Office while this press conference was going on. He was one of the key people in the room. I can only imagine what he must have thought when he heard Trump drawing this difference between the UK and the European Union. And this is one of the big things this week. Trump was going on about how the European Union was set up to do damage to the United States, which is just absolute nonsense, and how it's very bad and mean to the United States and try to take economic advantage of it, blah, 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 the usual Trump hyperbole. But in drawing a distinction between the EU and UK, he started going on about how he liked the UK as a place to do business. And he seems to be exempting it from the threat of tariffs at present. And he said because he has investments there. And he says he has investments in Turnberry and he's investments in somewhere else. And in particular, he highlighted how much he loved his investment in Doonbeg. Right, which I think all of us know.
He knows it's in there. Are you saying he doesn't?
Sorry, I talked.
One thing he understands is his own balance sheet.
Yeah, and can you let me finish the point?
Okay.
Was he having a senior moment? A bit like Joe Biden? Hold on. If Joe Biden had said that he believed that one of his British investments was Doonbeg in County Clare, he would have been derided by all the Trump fans on social media that this was evidence that the guy was senile. So not only that, there was another one that came in. The various invites that went out to the media to attend in the White House actually said for the meeting between Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, and Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Not Northern Ireland, Ireland. So for all the talk about how much the special relationship is between the United States and Ireland, we now have a couple of examples. They seem to think that we're part of the UK.
Well, put it like this, a lot of Americans think that. But the fact of the matter is that the Starmer visit, I think, was a success. Both the Turnberry and the royal invitation worked well with them. But
we're going to be inviting him, as well.
Yeah,
how do you think the Irish people would feel if Donald Trump turned up in Ireland?
Well, I know how you'll feel, but that doesn't mean the rest of the country feels that way. They'll get on with their life. They look at it as a bit of a circus. They won't take it seriously. Knowing him, he'll only stay for half an hour, play one round of golf, and that'll be it. Because
takes longer than half an hour to play golf, Ivan.
Okay. The point I'm trying to make is this. From Starmer's point of view, the Brits are prostrate, genuflecting to Trump to get a trade deal. Forget about tariffs, to do actually a new deal because they're free to do it. Brexit has been a disaster. They could pull this iron out of the fire. The UK economy is tanking despite some of the good things that Starmer has done in terms of the construction sector and the renewable energy sector. But the reality is, Matt, you're blinded to the reality here. First of all, ignore all Trump's bluster that you find so offensive, because that is just his steek, and to understand where he's ending up, everything is in a ghost. He can say one thing about Zelensky being a dictator, and he can meet him 2 days later and say he's a great fella and the bravest man he knows. Like, that is just that. Like, we've seen him for the last decade. That is the way he operates. He operates differently to anyone else. So I think you've got to look at Trump in terms of, he looks at everything in the context that the means justifies the end, or the other way around. The end justifies the means, insofar as that he is looking what is the outcome on all these issues. And obviously, if I was Micheál Martin, the one thing I would be saying is that if you look at Irish FDI in the US, number 7, highest in terms of the business, we're buying their Boeing planes right through to other things, their services and so on, that we are the European base for a lot of US corporates, and we are the gateway between Europe, who doesn't speak English, and the West. And what he's got to do is actually ensure that special relationship, leaving aside the plastic paddy, the diaspora and all of that we have proved to be the most profitable location for US foreign investment in Europe. And that relationship, if he's interested in business, is what needs to be preserved and nurtured.
How difficult is that going to be, though? I mean, you say that Trump, it's all bluster and the rest of it. And I know a lot of people have said, we went through this 4 years ago. It's just the same again. It's actually different this time. And it's different, you can see, with what he is doing in the United States of America at home. Having sent Elon Musk in with his chainsaw to public services.
We should give Elon a ring and say, could he give a visit to the Arts Council and the National Gallery and some of these headbangers who have total disrespect for taxpayers' money? Because no, they've incinerated money, some of these groups, and they've done it with impunity. There is no one going to lose their job. There's no one going to even be sanctioned. As usual, some of the civil servants will probably be promoted.
We can have a more sensible conversation about that later, but the point in relation to Musk is, the idea even, it's like that
to justify
Netflix.
Your job. I thought it was a great email to send. Please tell me what you did in the last week. Have you done anything useful to justify staying in a job? How many people might have difficulty answering that on our 300,000 public servants?
But hold on a second, right? You know how that's working in the United States. So basically, just imagine everybody did answer it. It's all been assessed by artificial intelligence. So all you actually have to do is just set a whole set of lies about what you did. And how would they actually be able to know? It's the most nonsense idea. And did you ever see the Netflix movie Don't Look Up? There's this guy who's modelled on Musk type guy who's basically inside in the cabinet telling all the elected officials and the president what to do. And this is what's happening with Musk this week, turning up inside a cabinet, unelected, no position in authority. It's a complete nonsense.
No, that's the theatre.
Hold on.
That's the theatre.
The theatre of it, but actually Musk is doing things which are having real life consequences and causing enormous damage. You know, you think it's a great idea.
Well, some of those NGOs that have been wasting a fortune.
Stop using these ridiculous right-wing talking points that are flooding social media as part of the Russian propaganda campaign. That's this NGO nonsense talk and the rest of it.
He hopes to save $1 trillion. That's what he hopes to do. And that's a good outcome if he can achieve it.
Okay, can I just finish?
Because America is going to go bust. He's right about that.
Can I just finish the point that I was actually going to make? In part of the cull that he's been doing, for example, just let me give you one example of the stupidity of it. They managed to fire all the guys who were in charge of the nuclear codes, right? And then when they realised what they'd done and went, oh Christ, we need to get these guys back, they had shut down all their email accounts and they weren't able to contact them. So there was this enormous complete, what the hell are we going to do? They managed to find them all and beg them to all to come back. There have been key jobs wiped out all over the United States in this so-called drive for efficiency. This is all about providing the money for tax cuts for the rich, making the wealthy wealthier at the expense of ordinary people who have daily jobs to do. This is an oligarch taking over, taking control. This is the same type of things that have happened in Russia and other places in conjunction with an elected president who then starts acting like an authoritarian dictator. And it's very easy to be glib about all of this, but the dangers are absolutely enormous. And great damage has been done to the United States because of that. And that has impacts throughout the world. And if you start then saying, do we want an Elon Musk type to come in and start with a chainsaw to, yes, there's waste and things go wrong in public sector spending. But by God, I can tell you, it happens in the private sector as well. There are countless examples in the private sector of Irish businesses which have had to be bailed out by the state when they have messed up. We remember, for example, your friends in the banks. Do you remember how they nearly blew up the state alongside all the property developers 15 years ago, and it was the state which had to step in and rescue them?
But while the regulator was asleep at the wheel.
Oh, well,
the regulator.
You're blaming the policeman for the criminals.
No. What I'm saying is this: in relation to Musk and in relation to all this, there is no prospect of the public service and efficiency and evaluation of value for money happening within. It has to be imposed from outside. It has to have a shock and awe system, a bit like Colin McCarthy did with Board Snip. And of course, there's mistakes going to be made, things are maybe going to be axed or whatever. But I mean, like, I think we started when the Troika arrived and we said, oh my God, there's 580 quangos in this country. There's probably even more today. We have mission creep. We have a situation that the opening position for the budget of every single department, every single state agency is, well, we have what we hold from last year, how can we get a 5% increase? And therefore, now and again, maybe once in a decade, you have to look at this mission creep, you have to look at the feather bedding and say, you know what, this, because I know how hard some people work to pay their taxes, and they are sick to the stomach with what's happening in terms of waste in the public sector. I've outlined so many cases whereby absenteeism, working from home, poor outputs. There is no one in charge. There is no one taking responsibility when things go wrong. There is actually no circumstance that anyone can be fired. And once you can't fire someone, you actually are on the back foot. There's nothing you can get them to do.
It's not entirely true that nobody can be fired. It's difficult, but I'm going to give you
politicians can be fired.
I give you one example. Before we take the break, I give you one example of where I'd bring the chainsaw to first. The very first €90 million saving is by abolishing the horse and greyhound racing fund, and then your beloved horse racing would have to stand on its own four legs instead of actually getting this subsidised by the state to all the people who go off with their expensive horses and getting their breeding in there. So that'll be the first thing we'll go. And also to be good for the welfare of animals. We need to take a break.
The return on the capital of that 90 billion is about 3 billion, mostly made up of thoroughbred exports and about 30,000 people
everybody has an argument for their own vested interests to save the money that they want to go into their own preferencing. Suddenly say, but yes, we're doing this good, we're providing this money. 3 billion return on that 90 million. You've got to be joking. We'll be back with more in the second part of Path to Power after this.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland.
Learn more at greenmanopen.com. Before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down. A past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back to this second part of Path to Power. So, Ivan, what do you make of what's going on in the Dáil? We still can't get a settlement in relation to speaking rights as to whether independent TDs who voted for Micheál Martin as Taoiseach and got some of their mates, some of Lowry's lackeys into government, are actually opposition TDs from the point of view of having speaking rights. This is a complete and utter mess, which is also stopping the formation of Oireachtas committees. What's your take on it?
This is a very serious problem, and this is going to get much, much worse next week. So on Wednesday night, the Dáil Reform Committee, after 6 weeks of kicking this backwards and forwards in terms of the formation of technical groups and whether you could have a technical group of TDs like Michael Lowry, like Barry Heenahan, like Gillian Toole and so on, who could vote on every occasion almost with the government and yet be defined as an opposition group because, you know, the technical groups heretofore have all been part of the opposition and they're not office holders and so on. They've now reached a point that this is not a row with the Count Corla. This is a row between the government and the opposition, insofar as there's no ruling she can make because the reform of standing orders, which is a matter for the Parliament and not for the Count Corla, is faced with the reality that there's a complete division. So what the government and Micheál Martin have decided to do is simply face down the opposition. And I think this is, you know, I always say there's never a wrong time to do the right thing, but the deeper you dig a hole, the harder it is to get out of it. And he's kept digging, in my opinion, for the last 6 weeks. This is an inconsequential issue for the government of the day. The government meets on a Tuesday morning, it makes its decisions, and the Dáil either rubber stamps them, and the primary role of the Dáil, I remember when I was minister, turning up in the Dáil was a pain in the ass. It was only where you got abused and so on. It was it was something you had to do as part of a democratic exercise. So, like when they say getting work done in the Dáil, that is actually scrutinising the government. First point, let's be clear. The way I see this is that the question is put, do the standing orders which set up this technical group in opposition, which give them entitlement to priority questions, when that vote goes through, I think the entire opposition will walk out of Leinster House. And I think this is completely without precedent. And I totally get people that say it's disproportionate and there'll be, partisan arguments. So now, how do they walk back in is the question. So, while they're out, no Dáil committee can be formed. The most important Dáil committee, the Public Accounts Committee, requires an opposition chairperson. Once there is opposition unity in this, the Dáil is paralysed. So when any piece of legislation is published, second stage is a general debate in the floor of the House in plenary session. It goes to committee. And committee can take days and days and days. So there'll be no committee a movement on Parliament, on legislation. So that's going to be a complete paralysis. So if they keep this up, the opposition, and if they're united, they will actually push the government in a situation that they cannot get the Dáil to function. And I actually think, look at the win side of this for the government, that Lowry gets to ask a priority question. And let's be clear also, references to the British Parliament, whereby in Prime Minister's questions, members of the government and members of the opposition, can ask questions. That is a different system to what we have. Is they don't have priority questions. They don't have a situation that you jump the queue and there are 5 or half a dozen questions that are asked specifically by the opposition in leaders' questions and in priority questions to ministers. And put it like this. This is opposition time, and it's a minor part of government of the country, and I actually think that the government have just gone further and further. So when they vote this through, not only in the committee but in the full parliament, I think that is going to press the nuclear button. And I would say this, and Micheál's around long enough now to know this, there'll come a time that some minister is in the shithouse, right, and surviving for life, and will Mary Lou or Ivana Bacik give them the benefit of the doubt where, there are extenuating circumstances or some other row where you need a little bit of a dig out. If you go for the nuclear option against the opposition, be careful what you wish for, because they'll be waiting for you in the long grass. So the government, this is a question of might is right here. The government can force this through, but it's the wrong thing to do. And some of the examples they've given vis-a-vis the UK actually don't hold water. As I said earlier, This does not pass the smell test.
Okay, is there not something quite obvious here, that the decision on whether you're a part of the government or whether you're part of the opposition can be decided who you voted for as Taoiseach? Mm-hmm. And if you voted for Micheál Martin to be Taoiseach, that you were taken as supporting the government and not part of the opposition.
Absolutely, that would be fair, yeah.
That just no. I suppose you could say that there are people who can claim that they're politically neutral in the sense that they vote one way on one issue and vote a different way on another issue. But the reality is a deal was cut between this group of regional independents and the government, which makes them part of the government.
Yeah.
And logic dictates that, therefore, they should not be given priority speaking time as members of the opposition.
And every TD has absolute rights to raise questions and to ask questions. So this is not really, and it's certainly not about free association. You can associate with anyone you like. In fact, it's the association of the regional independents with the government that's at issue here. But I just feel sometimes if you double down on something that is an error of judgment in the first place, it'll come back to haunt you.
See, this is the thing. Why are they actually doing that?
Because they can. They just want to tell Mary Lou, go F yourself. That's
and
what
they now
want to
don't want to be seen to back down for loss of face.
That's it.
But if you see...
Which is really, really bad rationale.
That strikes me for bad politics from one sense, that I'm not sure the public is engaged in the minutiae of any of this.
They will be if the Dáil is paralysed for 3 months.
Yeah, but I suppose at the moment, the way they're looking at it, they look at the roaring and shouting and screaming and they actually think, oh, Jesus, is this what we're after electing? I mean, I think a lot of people, even people who are not particularly interested in politics, a few of them said to me this week, they were taken by the idea of Verona Murphy telling the Taoiseach to stop behaving like a child.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't good for Micheál Martin, because particularly is that his whole image now is based on being the calm, responsible adult in the room. And suddenly he's told to stop behaving like a child. And there is this thing about Micheál Martin, which is he allows himself to get very prickly inside in the Dáil.
That word tetchy really drives him.
I know. The minute you tell him he's tetchy, he gets worse and worse and worse.
No, but I don't think this is anything to do with tetchiness. This is, look at the size of our majority. It's about 18 on a good day when you look at some of the votes that have taken place. We can push this through. Like the point is this, the amendment they made, which was giving more time, so they're making the point that the opposition will have less time, no less time to ask a question of a minister. That isn't the fundamental issue here. The fundamental issue is that, look, take this week. Dara Calleary was photographed. It came in my inbox on LinkedIn. Lorraine Clifford Lee, new Fianna Fáil senator in the Fingal West area, was photographed with Dara announcing grants for various things in Malahide, or her constituency area. The perk of being a government backbencher is you get the best of the good news early. Louise O'Reilly isn't called in for any photograph in Fingal to say, oh, I'm giving you credit for lobbying to get this 2 million for a community centre or whatever it might be. So that's the perks of being in government. The perks of being a government backbencher is you can ask to meet the minister. I have a deputation of this group. I want to meet the minister. They don't meet opposition deputation. So that's the perks of being. The perks of being in opposition tradition are that you can bellyache and you can have showboating, giving out about things. And so therefore that's the suit of clothes you wear. Get on with it.
Just as an aside to this, and I think it's an interesting thing as to whether people don't like losing face by saying sorry, but it can actually be a good tactical thing to do. Because I'm just thinking back, just an experience that I would have had about 30 years ago working as a journalist. And I remember putting something into print which caused people involved an awful lot of anger, felt that it was a little bit unfair, even though it was true and the rest of it. And I remember canvassing various opinions from people who I would respect. And one of them, I remember saying to me, never back down, never apologise, never said you get anything wrong. And started listening to that. And he's somebody I would still regard very, very highly, a friend of mine. And somebody else who said, look, there are times when, you know, you might feel a bit embarrassed about the fact that you've decided to back down, but it'll actually pay benefits for you in the long term. And I remember actually sort of reluctantly gritting my teeth, sort of backing down on a particular story, apologising. And it actually paid off in spades because the person appreciated it. And then, shall we say, when there was a major story there to be had, not long afterwards, gave me a call and gave me the details of what turned out to be a major, major scoop, which would have been very helpful to me establishing myself as business editor of the Irish Independent at the time. And if I actually hadn't, you know, made that apology. So I'm just thinking there are times in life where you actually have to sort of like, and then as well as that, you know, I remember making another apology in another situation and people don't notice or people forget very quickly.
And so I'm writing this book, The Game of Life, the 3 H's, honesty, humour, and the biggest H of all, humility. It is the get out of jail card. The people who get into trouble, it's always ego and hubris. People that were good become bad when they become infected by their own ego. Humility, and you know what? I even say put humility on steroids. If you create a little bit of vulnerability, people will love you. It always works.
Have you got sincerity in there? Because, you know, the great Groucho Marx line is, you know, sincerity is so important, and once you've mastered the fakery of that, you've got it made.
Can I interject with something that I thought was very, very important? I did a dairy conference on ESG yesterday, and the day before, so we had the Green Deal, and that basically set up in train a really important statement from Europe of 23 directives which are going to impact on business, which was all about sustainable corporate reporting and all this. The first one being CSRD, the second one being CSDDD, which was about due diligence. So anyway, a new commissioner has come in, and I was speaking to Damien Riley, who works for ICOS permanently in Brussels. He's left RTE. And I was speaking to different people. The volte-face, right? They only talk... So Draghi did a report and said, you know what Europe is in the best in the world at? Regulation and red tape, and that we need to change this. So Ursula has done a volte-face on this and is now saying the most important thing is competitiveness. I'll give you an example. So CSRD was the first corporate sustainability reporting directive coming down the tracks, and it came into effect the 1st of January 25 and was for data in 2024. So you had to report your carbon footprint, your emissions, what you were doing on gender, diversity, and all of this thing. And you know what they've just decided? They got up and said, we're doing an omnibus thing. And so instead of the threshold being 1,000 employees, above which this will apply to you, it's going to be 10,000. And instead of 50 million turnover or revenue, it's going to be 450 million.
That changes things dramatically.
So instead of 50,000 companies being in scope for CSRD right now, it's gone down to 10,000. My point is this, and apparently the due diligence one has been butchered altogether beyond belief. If this is the first sign of a change in the wind in Brussels, and you know, I'm saying this against myself because I've chaired more ESG conferences than anyone else, the fact of the matter is that there's a rethink on this, and ergo, you know those 30 billion of EU fines in 2030 for failure to meet our emissions targets, our decarbonisation targets? I don't believe they're going to happen because the politics of Europe is changing. The Greens are gone and Trump is in, and there is basically a rethink. And sorry, this may only be a short-term reprieve because I do accept this is the existential issue of the century. But in fact, in a lot of Irish companies' cases, this will give them breathing space to do this. But some of the requirements of these directives, energy efficiency of buildings is another one, with really, really detailed specifications, which will greatly add to cost. So what I'm saying is this: mark it down. Q1 2025, a complete change in the ESG agenda from Europe.
I was actually out and about myself this week. I was at the IFA, the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association conference on Wednesday. And it was really interesting. Jennifer Carroll McNeill, the new Minister for Health, was there talking about her ambitions in the job, which she's still getting to handle. She was promoting the new app that has been the HSE Health app, which is a good idea, but when you actually start logging into it, it needs further development. But because during the ad break on the last word, you were trying to get into your app and you couldn't make it work. Exactly.
But you're not able to send an email, I've learned.
Sorry, you get enough emails from me. How do you think you get all your material to read for doing this podcast? But it was very interesting that Tony O'Brien was there, the former HSE Director General. It was on one of the panels. And Tony O'Brien's a very impressive thinker. He writes now as a consultant and he writes a lot of newspaper columns, and he's always worth listening to.
He's a deep thinker, yeah.
He's a deep thinker.
And he's walked the walk.
Yeah, and he was very interesting in relation to the medical reimbursement system, particularly for the new drugs which come along. I mean, the pace of change in the delivery of medicines is absolutely extraordinary at present. The things that are being developed, things like biologic treatment, for example. So we focus a lot on cancer, and there was a lot of talk about oncology drugs at this conference, but there are other drugs as well which improve standards of living. And I'll give you an example. I've spoken previously about being diabetic and various medications that I'm on that, but I'm also asthmatic, and I've been having in recent years more problems with breathing, lung capacity and the rest of it. I'm now on a biologic treatment, and it has been transformative since I started it last January. Energy levels have improved, breathing capacity.
I hadn't noticed the energy levels, but carry on.
You don't notice anything about anyone else, Ivan. It's all about Ivan, you know.
Well, you're not an early morning person. You're not a late night person. Like, when is it that you're at your best?
Ivan, you don't notice anything about anyone else unless it's about yourself. But it was really interesting in that he said that the system that we have at the moment was really put in place back in 2013 when we were in the depths of economic despair and everything was been done to try and avoid spending money, and that it now needs to be changed to put in place speedier decisions as to what new drugs would be reimbursed when they're available. And then after the decision is taken to implement it, we are the third slowest in the European Union for adopting these new drugs and actually paying for them. And yes, as he acknowledged as well, you do actually have to have discussions and debates with the pharmaceutical industry about how much you pay for these. It's not just a question of giving a blank check, but particularly as the medicines are becoming more personalised as well. I mean, the reasons, for example, that I'm on a biologic treatment is because my blood markers showed that I would be in a good position to deal with this particular injection every month that I now get. And medicine is becoming far more specialised. And there was another speaker who was fascinating in relation to ocular improvements that were made using gene therapy. So basically, by understanding the human genome more, we're able to get drugs, shorter production runs because they apply to a smaller number of people, but improve the quality of their lives enormously. But all of this is expensive, and the state has to make... And sorry, I think Draghi came up big as well. There was also a representative from the European Commission there talking about how, the Draghi report has a specific section or chapter devoted entirely to pharmaceuticals, and that's where Ireland is actually at the forefront. And yet we are behind in relation to things like clinical trials, where we don't do nearly as many in Ireland, and we don't offer clinical trials to enough patients, particularly for things like cancer. So that's just a little aside.
You mentioned Jennifer Carroll McNeill. A good source of mine in the Department of Finance rang me and he said, Ivan, just want to alert you to what is the biggest time bomb in the lifetime of this government. And I say, oh, pray tell me more. Because this was in the context that BAM, who are building the National Children's Hospital, have got a contract from the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast to build a children's hospital there for 671 million or 800 million euros.
How much will that cost by the time it's finished?
So that brings us to where are we at with the...
But isn't it interesting that they got BAM to do it?
Yeah, well,
did they not see what happened in Dublin?
BAM are the biggest and are the most sophisticated for this type of specialised work. So I'd say, I'd like to see how long the tender list was in reality. But the point is this, and I don't know whether BAM are going to make money on the National Children's Hospital or not, but this is the issue. It now looks like it could cost not the 2.24 billion, but 2.4 billion. This is what I was told, that actually the building of the National Children's Hospital is a tea party in comparison to what's going to happen. So a day will come that all the building issues will be over and BAM will hand the building over to CHI, the board responsible for children's hospitals and all that good stuff. I'm told they have to recruit 4,000 staff, that the consultants are already in a logjam situation and the wider medical community. There aren't staff there for it. I'm told that it could cost at least 1.5 billion to run this hospital every year. All this is going to land in whatever. So this is 2025. Jennifer will definitely be Minister of Health for the 3 years that Micheál is Taoiseach. This bomb is going to go off. The chronic staffing shortages are going to come to light when they're simply not going to be able to staff this hospital. Leaving aside, so how can you run a hospital if consultants don't agree to relocate there? Just watch this space. I am told that this could actually become an absolute nightmare because the people who designed this overshot the runway in their ambition, and it, as I say, leaving aside the disaster of going from 800 million to 2.4 billion, it's only the start of it when you go staff it.
I got a cryptic message from somebody who's been involved in all of this as well, and that, when I say cryptic, well, he was... Some parts of it are clear, others not so clear. But the comparison was made with BAM doing the job down in Intel and other projects, and saying that the private sector keeps the push on to get the job done because they need their product as soon as possible.
I heard they weighed stuff on the way in and the way out in terms of delivery of goods in Intel. Like this, the oversight and project management on Intel, by Intel on BAM was just incredible.
Ironically, though, just as an aside, because I'm writing about this for the Business Post on Sunday, I mean, like, Intel is a basket case of a company. Intel was the 6th biggest company in the world at the turn of the century. It's now not even in the top 10 chip makers in the world. It has, after a series of disastrous decisions, it is now not the value. And in fact, its very existence is in doubt. And it could be a major issue for Ireland because there are still nearly 5,000 people employed in Leixlip and County Kildare at Intel, but there is Broadcom and the Taiwanese manufacturing company, the full name of it escapes me, they're talking about the potential breakup of Intel. So we could have major issue in relation to Intel in the future. So although it may have got its 17 billion investment down in Leixlip done on time and have it available to it, it's still a company in great bother.
I thought it was going to be sold.
Well, they've already sold the plant partially to Apollo Venture Fund. It owns 49%. It's all becoming very complicated. It's complicated because the Americans want to keep control of chip manufacturing. They want to bring it back to America. If they could, I'd imagine they would bring all of Intel back into the United States. But I don't think they actually have the money to do that. It's a mess. But anyway, the point is, we talk about the public sector always been a mess. The private sector could be a mess. But this message also pointed out that there will be a delay, which will probably be blamed on the contractors. Oh, it's not ready. But the delay in opening it will be about getting the medical and staffing issues sorted out.
But there'll come a point where it suits BAM to say, no, we're finished, here's your building.
Absolutely,
and they give them
that's the point.
But that's when the trouble
here
is really going to start. Can I talk about, there's a new sheriff in town. because you've constantly, and rightly so, been on about the Dublin Task Force, the security problems. So I think that former Assistant Commissioner Pat Leahy did a particular good job, and he was the cop who was in charge of Dublin. He's since retired. There is a new cop now, other than the Commissioner, who has been appointed specifically to deal with the problems of Dublin.
And his name is
Paul Cleary.
And this was a very interesting interview that John Mooney of the Sunday Times published last week.
So I just want to say, I like the cut of this man's jib. He says, look, I have 4,000 cops in the greater Dublin area under
I don't think he called them cops, though.
No, well, officers, please. Okay.
You're very American.
Cop on,
are you
cop
watching?
on.
You grew up watching Starsky and Hutch and Hill Street Blues. You're into your
Kojak
cops.
even. Okay.
Well, you're emulating Kojak and your look almost not far
Columbo
to go.
is my favourite. Just as going to one more thing, But anyway, so he's talked about the feuding gangs in Clondalkin and 40 incidents. He's spoken about maybe getting cops, because they can only run so fast, they're not that fit, on electric scooters, which I thought was a great idea. He's talking about that they've done these drone and other CCTV videos to see what the flashpoints are in terms of high visibility Gardaí. He's talking about parents. If there are 14 and 13-year-olds committing crimes and really causing problems, what are the responsibilities of parents? And I just thought he looked like a guy. Now, don't worry, Jim O'Callaghan will take all the credit for all the good stuff and he'll be left with all the lemons on it. But the other thing I thought was interesting, because we spoke about the exponential increase in knife crime. And apparently in Scotland, they had this amnesty whereby you throw your knives anonymously in a bin. And I was listening to Patrick Marry, also a former major cop for murder cases. And he said what they did was, after the date of the amnesty, if you're found with a knife, you get automatically a 2-year suspended sentence. And if at any point in the subsequent 2 years you're found with a knife, it becomes mandatory then. There's no option about it.
That's a very interesting idea.
And this system has worked really well to have a strategic approach. So we'll say, okay, these knives have become ubiquitous and people feel they need them for their safety. It only makes things worse. So let's have a date with an amnesty, and after that the law will change so that this is what you're facing: a yellow card of a suspended sentence, and then if you carry a knife, and I'm not talking about using a knife in possession after that, then it'll take its course. I thought that was a kind of considered strategic approach to it. And Paul Cleary, good luck to him. I think that, and what we need to put is a face on who is responsible for policing Dublin, and it's not the Commissioner, and he needs to be on the scene. He needs to develop a relationship with the public, with the local authorities in Dublin, and I think that sense of immediacy and personalising the problem is definitely going to cause an improvement.
Yeah, but there's one more thing. He needs more Gardaí. The force is falling in numbers. They are not providing enough new trained members of the force to cover those who are retired or who are out ill. And he spoke very well, very clearly about his aspirations. But I wonder, will he be able to deliver upon them if he doesn't have enough Gardaí to do so? One more thing.
Yeah,
I
have a bit of gossip for you. Yeah.
Well, let me talk about this one first. The scanner in the National Gallery, the X-ray machine, which they've had now. They ordered in 2017. They don't have a lead room in which to put it because of the radioactive element. So they actually have the machine, but they haven't ever imported the radioactive element. So it's a bit different from the famous printer in the Houses the Oireachtas, which wouldn't fit into the room it was designated for. In this case, they have the room, but it's not a suitable room because it's not lead lined. And everyone's jumping up and down about it, and rightly so. But I'll tell you what I thought about this as well. The additional little twist to this, which nobody has kicked up about, that there has been a commitment given that this will all be sorted out by the end of the year. And I'm going, but sure, the end of the year is 10 months away. How long is it going to take to sort this out? This has been presented like, well, we're determined now there will be a public procurement process to get this sorted out. How long does it really need to take? I know you've got to do a public procurement process to buy the materials, to get the builders in, to line the room, find the time. 10 months? 10 months to sort this out. That is nearly as bad as having the thing there for the last 7 years, that when it comes to public attention and when it actually gets all of the attention it's got, that we're told we'll get it sorted out this year by the end of the year. Sorry. I think that should be sorted out within 3 months. I'd love to know why it can't be sorted out. But I also would agree that when people are suggesting that, maybe this is a little bit of a distraction. It's easy to get caught up on the smaller things when there is bigger waste underway. But I still go back to the point in the row we had earlier. I don't believe that you just bring a chainsaw and you start axing everything. That does not work either.
Well, I put it like this. You make the point 10 months versus 3 months. I mean, the thing that jumped out at me. So this contract was signed in November 2017, €124,805 as part of a digital investigative imaging project. Right, good luck with that. November 17. This row should have kicked off in February 18. Not in February 2025. Like, who has been sitting on this file in the department who hasn't realised that this was a problem? Now, these guys have form. You remember the 800 grand printer for the Oireachtas that 10 months couldn't be fitted into a room. So obviously there's some genius in the department who doesn't speak to other geniuses in the OPW, say, just before we sign any contract for any piece of equipment, will you please tell us the logistics of fitting this and operating this? Like, it's not rocket science. But you're proud of, oh no, that's the Heritage Department. Oh, that's the Office Department. Or that's this and that. Oh no, they're completely separate to the IT people. That's the way it goes on. And you don't want the chainsaw going in. You're actually protecting them.
Save your gossip, by the way, for the subscription edition, will you? Because we were supposed
Simon Coveney and Lisa Chambers I want to talk about.
Yeah,
but anyway.
we were supposed to be talking about the Garda.
Not together, actually, but separately.
We were supposed to be talking about the Assistant Commissioner for the Guardian subscription edition, but you jumped ahead of yourself and you put it into this edition.
Well, I have so much to say about housing. There's been... James Brown did his first interview with some lady called Niamh Horan, the Sunday Independent.
So he was on the radio with me last Friday.
Yeah, did you get anything out of him?
It was actually interesting. I did.
Who's this Svengali maverick he's going to appoint?
We don't know yet. It's not you, is it?
Is it to chair the SHAO, the Special Housing Delivery Body?
We'll discuss that in the subscription edition. And
it's not me, but I think I might know who it is.
We'll talk about immigration as well, and we'll talk about German election results.
And there's quite a few letters.
A lot of questions in, and people giving out about a few things as well, particularly work from home. So that's all in the subscription edition, which you can subscribe to at mail@pattopowerpodcast.com, So mail@pattopowerpodcast.com to get in touch with us. pattopowerpodcast.com is where you can actually go and do your subscription if you want to listen to another 45 minutes to an hour of the two of us.
I don't know if I
I
can take that, but carry on.
That's it for today's edition. Big thank you to Aidan and Tom for putting up with us while we put it together. So until the next time, from me, Matt Cooper.
From me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you for listening.